There are punishments in baseball that get forgotten by the following week. And then there are punishments that change the conversation permanently. That make people who have spent their entire lives around this sport sit back in their chairs and take a breath before they say anything. That make veterans who have seen everything this game has produced in 40 years of watching it say, quietly and without drama, that they have never seen anything like this before. What MLB handed down on that Tuesday afternoon was the second kind. 3 players. 3 suspensions. All from the same roster. All announced in the same statement. All carrying the same 2 words at the end of the disciplinary language that made everything else in that statement secondary. For life. The play itself had lasted less than 3 seconds. That is the thing about the moments that produce the heaviest consequences in this sport. They don't announce themselves. They don't build slowly toward a climax the way a bases-loaded at-bat builds or the way a pitcher's duel builds through 8 scoreless innings. They arrive without warning in the middle of an ordinary sequence of events, and then they are over before most people in the stadium have fully registered what they witnessed. Shohei Ohtani had been running the bases. That's where it started. A hit that sent him from first toward second, the kind of base-running situation that happens dozens of times every night across every ballpark in the league. Routine. Familiar. The kind of moment that players execute on instinct because they have executed it 10,000 times before. What the 3 Yankees players did in that moment was not routine. What they did was not instinct. What they did was a decision. And decisions carry a different weight than instincts when the league office sits down to determine what consequences are appropriate. The first suspension belonged to the player who initiated contact. The footage, which had been reviewed by the league office for 36 hours before the announcement came, showed the sequence in a clarity that left no room for interpretation. No room for the benefit of the doubt that baseball sometimes extends when the evidence lives in a gray area. No room for the argument that things happen fast and intentions are difficult to prove and players deserve the assumption of good faith. There was no gray area. There was no benefit of the doubt available. There was only what the footage showed, frame by frame, in the kind of detail that high-definition stadium cameras produce when they are pointed at exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. The contact with Ohtani was deliberate. The league said so in language that was not careful or hedged or softened by the usual diplomatic architecture of official statements. It was direct. It named what had happened. It did not leave space between the words for alternative readings. Deliberate. Dangerous. Unprecedented in its coordination. That last word, coordination, was the one that explained why 3 players were being punished instead of 1. Because this had not been a single player making a single decision in a single heated moment. That was the finding that elevated the situation from serious to historic. That was the finding that moved the disciplinary conversation from suspension length to something the sport had almost no precedent for applying. All 3 players had been involved. The footage showed it. The communications reviewed by the league office confirmed it. The picture that assembled itself from 36 hours of investigation was not the picture of 3 separate individuals who had each independently made poor decisions in the same general vicinity. It was the picture of something planned. And when the league office arrived at that conclusion, the conversation about appropriate punishment changed completely. The statement came at 2:17 in the afternoon. It ran to 6 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the incident. The second paragraph described the investigation. The third paragraph named the 3 players and their suspensions. The fourth paragraph described the standard being set and the reasoning behind it. The fifth paragraph addressed the appeals process, or rather, the absence of one in cases of this classification. The sixth paragraph was 2 sentences long and stated that the commissioner's office considered the matter resolved at the institutional level. 6 paragraphs. The baseball world read them in approximately 4 minutes and then spent the next 4 hours trying to fully absorb what they had just read. 3 players. Suspended for life. The last time the sport had used that phrase in that context, multiple players, same incident, coordinated conduct, the year had 4 digits that started with 19. This was not that era. This was not that sport. The game had changed in 100 ways since then, in its rules and its culture and its understanding of what it owed to the people who played it. But the punishment reached back across all of that change and used language that belonged to the most serious moments in the sport's history. And it used it for what had been done to Shohei Ohtani. The Yankees' press conference that afternoon was the kind that nobody in that organization had prepared for, because nobody in that organization had believed, when the day began, that they would be sitting in front of microphones trying to respond to something like this. Their manager sat at the table with the expression of a man who had just been handed information he was still processing in real time. Not performing shock. Actually shocked. The distinction matters because it was visible and because the reporters in the room recognized it immediately. He said the organization was cooperating fully with the league. He said they respected the commissioner's authority. He said they were devastated, and he used that word carefully, deliberately, by the conduct that had led to this outcome. A reporter asked him whether he had known anything was planned before the game. He said no. His voice was steady when he said it. But his hands, resting on the table in front of him, were not entirely still. A second reporter asked whether the three players had said anything to the organization in the hours between the incident and the league's announcement. The manager paused for a long time before answering. He said the conversations that had taken place were private. He said he would not characterize them publicly. He said the organization's focus right now was on the players who remained and on the season that still had to be played. That answer produced a silence in the room that lasted several seconds. Because what he had not said was as loud as what he had. Dave Roberts spoke from Los Angeles. He had been notified of the league's decision before the public announcement came. The Dodgers had been kept informed throughout the investigation in the way that the organization representing the injured player is kept informed. Roberts had known for several hours before the statement dropped what the statement was going to say. He had used those hours to think about how to talk about it. When he sat down in front of the microphone, he looked like a man who had done a significant amount of thinking and had arrived at a place of stillness on the other side of it. A reporter asked him how he felt about the punishment. Roberts said he felt it was appropriate. He said it without elaboration, which in its own way was a form of elaboration. A man who had reservations about a decision uses more words. He uses qualifiers. He performs balance. Roberts used 4 words and then waited for the next question. The next question was about Ohtani. Roberts' voice changed slightly. Not dramatically. The small shift that happens when a person moves from answering a question about an institution to answering a question about a person they care about. He said Ohtani had handled everything with a composure that he, Roberts, was not sure he could have matched in the same situation. He said what had happened on that field had been genuinely frightening to witness from the dugout. He said the word frightening the way people say words when they have resisted saying them for a while and have finally decided the situation requires honesty over management. He said Ohtani deserved better from this sport. And then he said the thing that would be replayed and quoted and written about for the rest of that week. He said the league had agreed with that. 3 words. 7 syllables. The entire weight of what had just happened compressed into a sentence that took less than 2 seconds to say. The league had agreed. Ohtani's public statement was released through the Dodgers communications office at 4 p.m. It was shorter than most people expected given the magnitude of what had occurred. 2 paragraphs. The first expressed gratitude for the league's thorough investigation and for the support of his teammates and organization. The second said he was focused on returning to the field and continuing to compete at the level his team and his fans deserved. No anger. No satisfaction at the outcome. No performance of vindication. Just gratitude and focus and the return to baseball. It was, for anyone who had watched Ohtani navigate every extraordinary circumstance this sport had placed in his path, entirely consistent with everything he had ever shown about who he was. He did not need the punishment to be about him. He had already moved past it. The 3 suspended players had until the end of the business day to issue statements of their own. 2 of them did. Both were brief. Both expressed regret in language that was general enough to apply to almost any situation and specific enough to acknowledge that something serious had occurred. Neither statement used the word intentional. Neither statement used the word coordinated. The third player issued no statement at all. That silence, in the context of everything else, said exactly what it needed to say. By evening, the historians had been called. The analysts. The former commissioners. The people whose job it is to place things in context and explain to the public where a moment sits in the longer story of a sport that has been telling its story for over a century. They used words like unprecedented. They used phrases like turning point. They talked about what the punishment signaled for the future of player safety enforcement and for the league's willingness to act decisively when the evidence demanded it. All of that context was real. All of it mattered. But underneath all of it, underneath the history and the precedent and the institutional language of a sport reckoning with something it had not faced before, was a simpler truth. Something had been done to Shohei Ohtani. The sport had looked at what had been done. And it had decided, without hesitation and without appeal, that some things are unacceptable. Not mostly unacceptable. Not unacceptable within certain parameters. Just unacceptable. Full stop. For life.